Boopers, do you consider hunting games JRPGs? They seem to fit their own niche. So you're talking about like Monster Hunter, right, Boopers? I do agree with that. The hunting games like Monster Hunter, I don't feel like they're RPGs. And that's not at all to say that they're not good, because obviously they're fantastic. But I did sort of scratch my head a little bit when Monster Hunter World got RPG of the Year last year. But who am I to say whether or not it is an RPG? Let's see, what other questions have we got here? So here's actually a two-part question that came from CT and Dynasty Star. So this is actually two questions, but they both kind of were asking the same thing, I think. CT said, "What do RPGs mean to you?" And Dynasty Star asked, "What is your definition of a JRPG?" Everybody seems to have a different definition of what a JRPG is, and I'm curious to see what yours is. This is going to get a little controversial. That's the one. I think Japanese RPGs, or rather JRPGs, this is a question that I've been thinking about turning into a video for a while. So here's the thing. We have to establish a framework here to talk about. So what exactly is a genre? What is it? What is a genre supposed to be? See, that's where we're starting. That's where you have to start to talk about what a JRPG is. So I'll give you the abridged version. Genres are only useful as they are intuitive. And if a genre is counterintuitive, it fails to be useful. So that's the starting assumption. Essentially, what I mean by that is when you say JRPG, something that comes to mind should be consistent. I think that JRPG should mean Japanese style RPG, not necessarily in any way referring to the origin of that game. And here's why. Final Fantasy IX was developed in Hawaii. Now, if you were to say JRPGs only come from Japan, well, suddenly Final Fantasy IX isn't a JRPG anymore. That's point number one. Okay, you know what, that's probably enough, because this is just a rabbit hole of possible discussion. We will come back to this in a later video where we'll get really into the nitty-gritty, but that's a little teaser for you. That's going to be a convoluted video, and it's going to be kind of cerebral. We will get there, though. Can you go more into detail about that Final Fantasy IX thing? Yeah, so Final Fantasy IX was developed in Hawaii as part of a team of both American and Japanese developers. It was made in Hawaii, so it's not, by some people's definitions, it's not a Japanese RPG. Similarly, Secret of Mana and Secret of Evermore are functionally the same game, same exact mechanics. But one of them was made in Japan and the other was made in America. But the mechanics are entirely the same, like even down to the circular ring menu. So they ought to be part of the same genre. But by the definition that some people say, where Japanese RPGs are RPGs that come from Japan, then they would necessarily have to be two different genres, and I just don't believe that. I think that the moment that you have to say that Final Fantasy IX is a Western style or a Western RPG is the day that the genre fails to make sense and mean anything at all. Okay, we went back into that a little bit more. RPGs are kind of weird. I feel like they're in a way like pornography, in that you know it when you see it. you have to feel it, to really know whether or not you feel like it's an RPG or not. And by that I mean, mechanically, for instance, Fallout is very similar to probably Call of Duty, because it's got skill-based progression, but the real difference between the two is the feeling that it invokes, or that it evokes from you as you play it. And also, I guess, branching speech paths, branching discussions. You asked if the game reviews killed JRPGs. What do you think? I think that game reviewers back in the day didn't know what they had with Japanese style RPGs, turn-based RPGs. They criticized games for being turn-based. I've mentioned this in my channel trailers. Basically, criticizing a JRPG for featuring turn-based mechanics is like criticizing a platformer for, having too much jumping. Like, I distinctly remember reading through like EGM and them criticizing games for having lack of innovation in their battle systems. And I think that that's part of why a lot of people have this, what's the word, stigma when it comes to JRPGs. I think that public perception was affected a lot by RPG reviewers, or rather reviewers who reviewed RPGs that didn't know how to review an RPG. I mean, and that's kind of the nature of the beast when it comes to kind of corporate RPGs or corporate reviews of RPGs, is they can't allocate 100 hours to playing a game before they can start writing the review, right? So that's why I decided to do this. I felt like there was obviously something missing in a lot of people's reviews of RPGs. They were being under-delivered. They couldn't really talk about the story because they'd only played the first, chapter of the game. Yeah, maybe. I think that's probably one of the reasons that Final Fantasy really went so hardcore on over-the-top visuals, was because they figured, hey, if we can't show them how to play the game really well, at least we can show them some nice eye candy. And so that's where their focus shifted to. Do you think Pokemon Sword and Shield is going to be a good game? I've been hearing a lot of controversy about that game, says Sid. So, Pokemon is one of those games that I feel underqualified to talk about since I haven't played many of the very newer games. So, Pokemon Sword and Shield, I think it'll probably be alright. I like the fact that they're giving you camera controls in certain areas, and you are also in certain areas able to see Pokemon roaming around. A while back, I talked about how I would like that in a Pokemon game, but it's really underwhelming on the whole. I feel like Game Freak or the Pokemon Company as a whole has really been phoning this one in. But I feel like they're doing that because they're used to phoning it in. I said it. I feel like the Nintendo Pokemon has been resting on its laurels for a long time. And they've been tinkering around the edges of every new iteration for a very long time, and I'm bored with the series. And it's frustrating because there's so much that they can do with the series. They have such amazing ideas that they could put to use. But clearly they're just not putting in the effort to make it a series worth playing. Like, they won't even reanimate the Pokemon that they're currently using. Like, they've got a Blastoise shooting, what's the move? A Hydro Cannon out of his mouth instead of his actual cannons. Like, what's the point? So I feel like they could do a lot better, especially for the fact that they're like a multi-billion-dollar company. Like, each game sells hundreds of thousands or millions of copies. Like, they've never had a failure. I hope that this game is fun, because if it's not, obviously that's going to be really disappointing to a lot of people. But I, at the same time, feel like Nintendo or the Pokemon Company, they need a slice of humble pie. They need to stop feeling like they can just print money with Pokemon, because at the end of the day, quality should matter. And if this game sucks, I hope that it inspires them to do better next time. But again, I feel underqualified to say any of that, but because you asked me on the Q&A, I felt obligated to say something.